During the Civil War, prominent Cherokee Nation leader Stand Watie, also referred to as Stand Hope Uwati Degataga and Isaac S. Watie, was a brigadier general in the Confederate Army. Born on December 12, 1806 in Uthkaloga, Cherokee Nation, present-day Calhoun, Georgia, Watie was the son of David Uwati, a Cherokee, and Susanna Reese, who had both Cherokee and European ancestry. Originally going by Isaac Uwati, he eventually decided to delete the U from Uwati as he got older and adopt the English version of his Cherokee name, Degataga, which means stand firm. Watie received his education at the Moravian Mission School in Spring Place, Cherokee Nation, now part of Georgia. As he grew older, his father had become a prosperous planter who owned slaves. Watie later became a writer for the Cherokee Phoenix newspaper, where he actively opposed Georgia's anti-Indian laws. In 1828, when gold was discovered on Cherokee land in northern Georgia, thousands of white settlers flooded the area. Despite federal treaties meant to protect their territory from state actions, Georgia seized much of the Cherokee land. In 1832, the Georgia militia destroyed the Cherokee Phoenix newspaper. The federal government soon got involved, pushing the Cherokee to relocate to Indian Territory. In January 1836, the Treaty of New Echota was signed, outlining the terms for the entire Cherokee Nation to move west. Though the treaty was signed by a small faction of Cherokee leaders and not approved by the Cherokee National Council, the U.S. Senate ratified it. This treaty became the legal foundation for the forced relocation known as the Trail of Tears. The Watie brothers supported relocating the Cherokee to Oklahoma and were among those who signed the Treaty of New Echota. This put them in conflict with John Ross and the Anti-Removal National Party, which refused to approve the treaty. Eventually, the Watie family, along with many other Cherokee, moved west. Stand Watie, a slaveholder, established a successful plantation along Spavinaw Creek in Indian Territory. Meanwhile, the Cherokee who followed Chief John Ross stayed on their ancestral lands for 2 more years until the U.S. government forcibly removed them in 1838, leading to the tragic Trail of Tears, during which thousands lost their lives. The year after the Treaty of New Echota was signed, many of its signers were marked for execution. In June 1839, Stand Watie's brother, Elias Boudinot, was killed outside his home. On the same day, their cousin and uncle John and Major Ridge were also assassinated by Cherokee, who opposed the treaty. In 1842, Watie confronted James Foreman, one of his uncle's killers, and shot him dead. Although Foreman was unarmed, Watie was tried for murder in Arkansas and was acquitted, claiming self-defense. In 1845, Ross supporters murdered another of Stand Watie's brothers, Thomas Watie. That same year and into 1846, at least 34 politically motivated killings occurred within the Cherokee Nation. Starting in 1845, Stand Watie served on the Cherokee Council, where he spent part of his tenure as Speaker. When the Civil War began, the majority of the Cherokee Nation sided with the Confederacy, and Watie formed a cavalry regiment. He was commissioned as a colonel in the 1st Cherokee Mounted Rifles in October 1861. By December of that year, Watie was engaged in combat with hostile native troops in what is now Oklahoma's Tulsa County in the Battle of Chusto-Thalassa. Later, in March 1862, Stand Watie fought at the Battle of Pea Ridge, Arkansas. In his report on the battle, General Albert Pike wrote, "My command was about 1,000 men, almost all of them Indians except for one squadron. The enemy fired into the woods where we were positioned. The fence in front of us was torn down, and the Indians charged straight through the woods and out into the open, shouting loudly. They captured the battery, fired on the retreating enemy, and chased them through a fenced field to our right. The Cherokee then helped move the battery back into the woods." Although the Battle of Pea Ridge ended in a Union victory, Watie's leadership and command of his troops gained attention. Union forces were concerned that Indian Territory might completely fall to the Confederacy. Watie was chosen Major Chief of the Cherokee Nation later that year, despite having served in the Confederate Army. Former Chief John Ross had fled to Washington, D.C., but his remaining supporters, now in the minority, refused to acknowledge Watie's leadership. This led to open conflict between the Union Cherokee and the Southern Cherokee. Confederate General William Steele, in his 1863 report on operations in Indian Territory, described Colonel Watie as a brave and daring officer. On April 1, 1863, Watie was given authorization to raise a larger brigade. Watie was the first Native American to get to the rank of brigadier general during the Civil War, when he did so in May 1864. He took the government riverboat J.R. Williams in June of that year and took with it 16,000 pounds of bacon and 150 barrels of grain. However, Watie later remarked that the spoils turned into a disadvantage, as many Creek and Seminole soldiers left to take their share home. In September 1864, Watie attacked and captured a Federal supply train of 250 wagons at Cabin Creek, successfully fending off efforts to reclaim it. The 1st Cherokee Regiment, a Cherokee battalion, the 1st and 2nd Creek Regiments, a squadron of Creeks, the 1st Osage Battalion, and the 1st Seminole Battalion were all part of General Watie's cavalry brigade at the end of 1864. Throughout the remainder of the war, General Watie remained loyal to the Confederate cause, becoming the last Confederate general to surrender. Once the leaders of the Confederate Native American forces learned that Richmond had fallen and the Eastern armies had surrendered, most began preparing for their own surrender. On June 15, 1865, the chiefs gathered for a grand council and passed resolutions urging Indian commanders to lay down their arms. However, Stand Watie held out until June 23, 1865, a full 75 days after General Lee's surrender in the East. Watie gave over his battalion of Creek, Seminole, Cherokee, and Osage men to Lieutenant Colonel Asa C. Matthews at Dokesville after realizing that continuing to struggle would be futile. After the Civil War, both the Union Cherokee and Southern Cherokee sent delegations to Washington, D.C., where Watie advocated for the recognition of a separate Southern Cherokee nation. Watie's request was denied, and in 1866 the government negotiated a treaty with the Union Cherokee, recognizing John Ross as the legitimate principal chief. Although it seemed that conflict might erupt again within the Cherokee Nation, the situation eased when John Ross passed away in August 1866. In the 1867 election, Lewis Downing, a full-blood Cherokee, was chosen as principal chief and succeeded in achieving a peaceful reunification, though some underlying tensions persisted into the 20th century. Meanwhile, Watie returned from the Civil War to find his home destroyed by Federal soldiers. Financially devastated, he spent his remaining years farming and working to restore his once pristine Grand River bottomland. Watie's 3 sons had all passed away before him. In his final years, he witnessed large areas of land that had been legally granted to the Cherokee being seized as punishment for their support of the Confederacy and redistributed to other tribes. A shattered heart is thought to be the reason Stand Watie died. In one of his last letters to his daughter, he expressed his loneliness, saying, "You can't imagine how lonely I am up here at our old place without any of my dear children with me." Stand Watie passed away on September 9, 1871, and was buried in Polson Cemetery in Delaware County, Oklahoma.